Here on VMAP, we like to do a little bit of news. So, just a couple of weeks ago, the U.S. state of Oregon legalized cannabis. As of July 1st, 2015, you could legally get high in Oregon. Do you know how many U.S. states have full legalization today?
I count 5.
I count 4. Oregon, Washington, Colorado, and Alaska.
No, I count 5. Oregon, Washington, Colorado, Alaska, and your state of mind.
My state of mind?
Well, yeah. Cannabis has always been legal. In your brain. Hi, I'm Rebecca Dahl.
And I'm James Gordon. Welcome to VMAP.
In our last episode, part 1 of BDSM, we introduced the concept of counterintuitive needs. To review briefly, counterintuitive needs are needs you wouldn't normally expect.
In the next 2 episodes of VMAP's exploration of power exchange and BDSM, we're going to begin to look at what drives these needs, focusing at first on neurochemistry. In this episode, we'll focus on endogenous opioids, and in our next episode, we'll look at the seeming paradox of opponent process. After that, we'll look at some more general psychological elements that continue to influence our drive for counterintuitive needs.
We prefer the term counterintuitive needs to masochism because it doesn't invoke any specific mental image or preconception, like whips and chains, and because it's our definition and can be broadened to more clearly include all elements of control and surrender because it removes the stigma of mental disorder.
We realize that all counterintuitive needs aren't the same. For example, the need to be berated or feel afraid may come from a different place than the need to feel physical pain.
That said, we see some strong similarities in the accounts of people who manifest strong counterintuitive needs, and some of the models we present would cover many manifestations.
We do want to be clear that we can't present all the answers on why counterintuitive needs exist, because nobody understands the full picture. Until the early 21st century, most research still focused on the idea that counterintuitive needs were a sickness. We can present a set of models or theories, and we know some of them are pretty sound. They aren't mutually exclusive and may interlink in different ways, but they probably don't paint the whole picture.
Models have their limits.
Before we show you models of how counterintuitive needs may work, it's important to understand what models of human behavior are and aren't good for. They are good for giving you an assortment of possibilities that may shed light on behaviors you don't understand.
Let's say you classify animals and have concluded that only birds have beaks, only mammals have fur, and only reptiles and birds lay eggs. Now, if you find a mammal that has a beak and lays eggs, you don't decide the mammal is wrong and just think it into non-existence. You decide that maybe your classification scheme is wrong and needs some sharpening.
Thinking in terms of the model, rather than the individual, can lead tops to make clumsy mistakes, and bottoms to keep trying things that simply don't work for them, because they believe they're a type. Models are patterns that may help explain the individual. They're not rules. If the individual doesn't fit the model, throw out or revise the model.
Models for counterintuitive needs.
Let's be honest up front that we don't understand all the reasons for counterintuitive needs. Our understandings are imperfect, and past research focused on a cause or a cure for a perceived sickness. We think that understanding what we know will help us both understand what we don't know and destigmatize people with counterintuitive needs. In this episode, we'll look at an area of human biochemistry that's especially relevant to BDSM. Endogenous opioids, which include endorphins.
Wind the clock back to 1973. The first jogging craze is in full swing. It wasn't widely referred to as running until a little later. At the same time, Drs. Candace Pert and Solomon H. Snyder have published the first detailed study about how our brains process natural opiates, including endorphins. Over the next couple of years, media articles in the glossy magazines of the day begin to suggest that this might account for what was called at the time a runner's high.
The evangelist for this idea was Jim Fixx. Fick's father was an editor at prestigious Time magazine, but he died of a heart attack at 43 caused by congenital heart defects. Fick believed that fitness and the effect of endorphins might save him from the same fate, and authored a seminal book in 1977 that sold over 1 million copies, with follow-ups in the early 1980s. Fick was wrong about his heart, although he outlived his father by nearly a decade before he died of a heart attack in 1984. Around the same time, researchers found that there were elevated endorphins in the blood of people who had recently exercised.
For years after, many doctors and scientists said he'd been wrong about endogenous opioids too. The runner's high was just a delusion. Endorphins in the blood couldn't pass the blood-brain barrier.
The word was out about runner's high, and it became clear that other sports involving duress had similar effects. And this was the state of the art when BDSM, fueled by the popularity of Anne Rice's beauty books and other popular publications, began to edge out of the closet and into suburban bedrooms, where couples with floggers and hidden restraint points dealt with two needs. The first was to explain to themselves why something generally seen as bad or sick felt good, while also explaining to authorities, event venues, and neighbors why it was okay.
The runner's high seemed to fit both bills. It provided a safe and normal reason to be hurt. Phrases such as riding the endorphin or flying became so common that, by the turn of the century, you could find authorities on BDSM who said that if you weren't trying to fly or didn't make your partner fly, you were doing it wrong.
At the same time, the scientific community had a lot negative to say about the runner's high. It wasn't a theory proposed by researchers, and many articles informed us over and over again that endorphins in the blood couldn't pass the barrier into the brain.
So, of course, there was an easy way to answer the question. Just put a spinal tap into someone who's exercising, and of course that'll tell us whether or not the brain is also getting elevated levels of natural opiates. But the thing is, no lives actually hung on the answer. And frankly, using a spinal tap for research that was mostly seen to be of recreational significance, it would just be unethical. So there were really no answers until about 2008.
Professor Dr. Henning Bucher is a neuroimaging specialist at Bonn University. He believed that there was a way to answer the question, and he thought it was relevant not only to sports medicine, but his specialty of neurodegenerative diseases.
Using a modern PET scan, he was able to look into the brain and see how changes in endorphin levels while exercising correlated closely with mood shifts.
In the last 5 years, evidence has emerged that, like most neurochemical matters, the answer is not one-dimensional. Some of the effect of flying may come from endogenous cannabinoids, substances similar to those found in marijuana, which have their own brain receptors and play roles in appetite, pain sensation, mood, and memory. As we said at the beginning, cannabis has always been legal.
In your brain. It's no surprise that the runner's high, or flying, is not all driven by one chemical. Neurochemistry is a complicated lattice of interlinked chemicals. There are few simple relationships, and every chemical combination has the potential to affect the others. Sometimes it's useful shorthand to say endorphins cause flying, but the reality is far more complicated.
Still, Jim Fick was essentially right about the runner's high, even if he didn't understand all the chemicals that contributed. He also presents a cautionary tale.
Fick thought flying alone would fix his health problems. That wasn't the case, though the beneficial effects of the endogenous opioids in the healthy lifestyle they drove him to might account for some of the reason he lived nearly a decade longer than his father.
With other preventative measures and medications, Fick might still be alive today. The same thing is true with psychoactive medicines and other health maintenance. There's no magic bullet, and while flying may help, all approaches to mental and physical health are best seen as legs of the chair, rather than single supports.
As we come to better understand the mind as a complex organic computer, we'll revisit the fact that there's no shame or lack of willpower implied in needing meds or therapy to keep it functioning well. Machinery needs maintenance, and if your car needs more frequent oil changes than others, you may complain, but you don't consider yourself virtuous for going without them, or expect your car to run well without them.
We do understand that finding the right kind of oil for your mental car can be an often frustrating challenge, especially without supportive friends and a thoughtful and focused medical practitioner who's open to understanding the role that kink and power exchange play in your life. In later episodes, we'll talk about good places to get the right kind of mental health help. But for now, see the doobly-doo for some links to help get started.
While the effect of endogenous opiates or cannabinoids is best characterized by flying, they're probably present in most stress situations, and you may not need to fly to get some positive mood benefits.
Still, even as flying came to define BDSM around the turn of the century, there were plenty of people who never felt any sort of altered state, but still found a draw to pain, humiliation, or confinement. A need they could describe as almost addictive. What about them?
Some flying enthusiasts who felt that endogenous opioids were all that lay behind BDSM suggested that those who didn't fly might actually be sick, and that they were truly dark sadists and masochists psychiatry had seen as sick or broken. Were they? We'll find out in the next episode.
In the next episode of VMAP, we'll look at opponent process. If you've never heard of it, don't worry, most people haven't. But we'll ask the question, why do dogs that get shocked end up happy? And why do skydivers who experience a huge amount of fear turn around and go back again to jump out of a perfectly good airplane?
Because they're crazy.
And understanding these seeming perversities, we'll come to understand a lot more about the secret needs that lay beneath power exchange and BDSM.
In this episode of VMAP, we learned that
the idea that stressful activities, including running and presumably most physical BDSM, release endogenous opioids into the brain goes back to the 1970s.
The idea was popularized in the 1980s and 90s as BDSM moved into suburban bedrooms through the internet and popular novels, leaving those who liked it searching for a way to explain it to themselves and their neighbors, families, the cops, and basically any place they wanted to hold an event.
Even after studies in the 1980s proved that exercise increased endogenous opioids in the blood, many authorities said that since they could not cross the brain-blood barrier, they would have little impact.
Studies by Henner Booker in 2008 showed that endogenous opioids were released into the brain during exercise. Additional research in the past 5 years has added endocannabinoids to the pool.
Our takeaway from this is that the idea of a runner's high was right from the beginning, but when dealing with neurochemistry, nothing is simple, and most major effects are probably the product of several different neurochemical interactions.
And finally, we learned that while BDSM and Power Exchange may be therapeutic and help with leading a balanced life, they're not miracle cures, nor are they magic bullets. Overall mental and physical health includes doctor visits, medication, or therapy as needed.
For VMAP, I'm James Gordon.
And I'm Rebecca Dahl.
Remember, there's no right way to do power exchange.
Only your way.